Hi, I'm Snappy Dragon, also known as V. Today I'm going to talk to you about how I made my 18th century shift. So the 18th century shift is kind of like your basic underdress. It's like the evolution of the Middle Age and Renaissance smock. It grew into the Victorian chemise, and eventually even into like the frilly Edwardian combinations before the 1920s happened and clothing completely changed. This would be your undergarment that if you were a woman, if you were dressing as a woman, you would wear under everything all the time. You might also sleep in it. The important thing to remember about a shift is the purpose of wearing like all of these layers you see in historical costume is because oftentimes the outer layers, you couldn't actually clean them. Like you can't just throw your woolens in the wash with the harsh soap and wash them in the stream and beat them with a paddle and all of the other stuff that you would do to keep clothes clean. You couldn't really as easily do that to your outer garments. They were too valuable, too precious, and probably just wouldn't hold up. So what you did is you wore layers underneath to keep those clean, to absorb your sweat, your body oils, and everything. That actually helped keep you cleaner as well. So linen is really, really good at absorbing all of that and keeping you clean. People would have as many changes of shift as they could afford, like change it every day if they could, and then launder it in between wearings. The pattern is pretty much all squares and rectangles. This is something what mine looks like. The only deviation from the squares and rectangles is the process of what's called goring or crossing, which I'll explain a little bit later on with the cutout pieces. Let's go ahead and see how we're gonna make this.
Here are my shift pieces. They're cut out. This was originally 2 yards of the white linen from Dharma, and you can see over there I've actually got a bunch of unused scrap. Like I could make a cap of that, I could make some ruffles out of that, I could make... who knows what I'll make out of that. But the point being, I'm pretty sure I just cut out a shift out of 1.5 yards of material. And I'm pretty happy about that, although I do realize a lot of that is due to the fact that I am very little. So I get lucky with needing lots of material or not. I self-drafted this pattern. It seems like there's a lot of resources out there because it's just squares and triangles, basically, how to just slap something like this together out of your own measurements. So here's what's going on. There's a big rectangle that's the body. This is 24 by 42, because that's how long I've decided I want to make it, and then the 24-inch measurement seems to actually be more based on the widths of fabric that were available in the 18th century. So I figured, that'll be enough room, and I just went with it. Up top, what I've done is marked halfway down, so 21 inches down, the length of the shift body. And then up there, I've taken my back shoulder width, so shoulder point to shoulder point across the back of my neck, which plus some seam allowance was 16. And then I cut off the remaining, no, I think it was 17. Anyways, I cut off the remaining triangles, and these are going to be crossed. That's the word I found for it in a Victorian, like 1840s era sewing manual. But it's the same thing happening. These are going to get sewn into triangular gores down the outside, flipped around, so flipped like that, and then attached to the body there, so it'll have a little bit more width for walking and moving around and stuff. Then up here, this is a 16 by 15 piece that's going to become the sleeves. They're pretty narrow. They go a little bit past my elbows, so like they have room to move around, but no extra fluffiness or anything. And then there is a 6-inch by 6-inch square. That's the gusset for the underarm to give me a little bit more movement. Normally when I've made shifts in the past, I've literally just taken 2 big body rectangles and sleeve rectangles and just slapped it together. I haven't crossed them. I haven't done underarm gussets, but with this one, that was actually how they were constructed, and I want to make sure I can do it. I've also never made a shift with long, narrow sleeves before. It's always either been very short sleeves or very big, fluffy sleeves. So I think for this, the underarm gusset may actually be necessary because I would like to be able to move in this. The first machine sewing I did was to sew the 2 triangular pieces of each gore together. On 2 of the pieces, because they had completely raw edges, I used an overcasting stitch. The reason I chose to overcast instead of fell the seams by hand like I did on the rest of the project was that I wanted to preserve as much material as possible in the gores. Felling would have needed a bigger seam allowance, so I didn't want to do that. Then I switched out the overcasting foot for my regular foot and switched to a normal straight stitch, and sewed together the two gore pieces that had the center line cut on the selvage. No seam finishing necessary here. I put together the shoulder seams next, sewing from mark to mark with a quick straight stitch. Now it was time to work on the gussets and the sleeves. I had never inserted sleeve gussets like this before, so I followed Morgan Donner's absolutely wonderful video tutorial step by step, with a few errors on account of my own inexperience and forgetfulness. I'm not going to try to explain the gusset inserting process step by step because it's been so long since I recorded this video that 1, I don't remember what I did, and 2, I just filmed a straight time lapse of this process instead of carefully creating a step by step to show what I was doing. If you're curious about how to insert underarm gussets like this, you should go watch her video. There's a link in the description, and in this video if I can figure out how to do that. Here's what the completed sleeve gusset looks like from the inside. Next, I started inserting the gores into either side. This was a bit of a weird and finicky process because I found out in the middle of pinning them in that my hem cutting had been a little bit crooked and I had to correct for it. Thankfully, my hem remained on the straight grain, so I didn't have any major issues there. I don't have any particular advice on how to go through this, other than just pin everything in as neatly as you can beforehand, and take the time to do it right. I used a straight stitch and a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance for these, so I could use that seam allowance to fell the seams later. Then I sewed up the side seams using the same straight stitch and 5/8 inch seam allowance. Welcome to my living room. I have marked out the front and back necklines for my shift. I've done it on one side because I just want to cut out on the fold. So the front, I just put it on and I marked out what seemed like an appropriate lowness of neckline. It should be an inch or so above where my stays will fall, but not a whole lot higher because I don't want it popping out from under the gown. And if necessary, I can cut this lower. On the back, I've done something which is decidedly not period correct. And I have left the back neckline very, very high. The reason I've done this is because I have a tattoo on my back, and leaving the back of the shift neckline very high will help me keep it covered up. I decided to fell all of the seams in this project by hand. Felling involves cutting down one side of the seam allowance and then folding the other side over it, then stitching it down to encase the raw edges fully. It makes the garment hold up very, very well through repeated washing because those raw edges are so fully encased. It's time consuming, but I've realized I really enjoy hand stitching because I can do it and still be doing something when I'm otherwise too tired to do anything but watch TV. Here's what the flat felled seams on the underarm gusset look like, on the shoulder, and on one of the side gores. There were a few areas at the top of the gores that didn't have enough seam allowance for flat filling, so I finished these on the machine with overcasting. Sorry about the amount of my hair in this video. Here is my as finished as it's going to get for now shift. I've left the neckline unfinished, as you're about to see, because I'm not yet sure where the neckline on my dress or my stays will fall, so I want to be able to adjust it for that. Same thing with the sleeves. I don't know if they'll be too long or too floofy, so I've left them unfinished, and I haven't filled the sleeve seams. Here's a look at what the gores look like from the outside. Thanks for watching! Happy sewing!